Okay, so hello everybody, and welcome to Full Steam Ahead, our third session with Captain Christopher Hearn and Carol Ann Black. So before we begin, I would like to start with a land acknowledgement. So while we meet today on a virtual platform, we would like to begin by acknowledging the Indigenous peoples of all the lands that we are on today. We do this to reaffirm our commitment and responsibility to improving relationships between nations and improving our own understanding of local Indigenous peoples and their cultures. Ships to Shores aims to encourage collective introspection about the current relationships between Indigenous and non-Indigenous communities, as First Peoples, as Canadians, as members of coastal communities, and as people in the marine sector. So our class here today has been to a couple of sessions, but I'll just reiterate. So Ships to Shores connects young people with Canada's marine sector and sailing through arts and culture, workforce development, civic engagement, and history and heritage. So the project has so far engaged more than 2,300 youth across the country since 2020. And our partner today in Full Steam Ahead is COVE, the Centre for Ocean Ventures and Entrepreneurship, which is located in Dartmouth, Nova Scotia. And they encourage innovation within the ocean sector through their workforce development strategy and supporting careers in the blue economy. So we have really exciting presenters here today, so I'll just quickly introduce them. First, we have Captain Christopher Hearn, who is the director for the Center for Marine Simulation at the Marine Institute of Memorial University. And we have Carol Ann Black, who's an oceanographer and principal consultant with Consulting Science Writers. So welcome, Captain Hearn and Carol Ann, and I will pass it off to Captain Hearn to begin.
Okay, well, I'm very pleased to be here and to join Carol Ann and to talk to everybody. As has been explained, I'm the director here for an advanced simulation facility that's part of the Fisheries and Marine Institute here in Memorial University in St. John's, Newfoundland. So my role here is basically the oversight and direction of a facility that does a lot of really interesting work. Obviously, the maritime industry, the shipping industry, it's a high-risk operation. And so preparation, the education and the training components that are required to become a chief engineer or the chief officer or even the captain of a ship requires a lot of training. And so our facility was designed to be able to replicate really challenging and really difficult operating conditions. So we have very specialized simulators here. Some of them that actually move like a real ship. I'm actually sitting on one now. I'm going to stand up in a minute and just give you a little look around. And it looks and it feels like the real bridge of a ship. So if you're going to train for operating out in the middle of the North Atlantic in dense fog and high seas and ice and all kinds of terrible things, then this type of simulator is used for that. My career started out in the Marine Institute. I'm actually a graduate. I'm an alumni of the Marine Institute and very proud to be one. I came from a family that had experience at sea, and certainly in the community I grew up here in Newfoundland. A lot of people were on the water, either fishing or on ships. And it seemed like the thing that I was going to do. So as soon as I graduated high school, I went right into the Marine Institute, into the Nautical Science program here. And through the 4-year program, I graduated, and I was a third officer when I finished. And I sailed on ships all over the world, from the Arctic to the Caribbean, from the Mediterranean and the North Sea to the Pacific, and all across the Atlantic. And as I moved through my career from third mate, I would then come back into to training and education for a year to move on to a second mate or a second officer. And then I would go back to sea, and then I would go home again, and then I would go back into school, and then from second officer to chief officer, and then finally up to master, up to captain, master mariner. So I can sail as the captain of any size ship anywhere in the world on limited tonnage. And so when I got to that level, it was very interesting because my career took off in a lot more different ways. All the things that you've done from your time in school, through your time doing training and education, up to the master's position, finally prepares you, at least you think, for the reality of commanding a ship at sea. And certainly it does, but there's a lot of things you have to learn, and there's a lot of things that you don't know. And so being able to adapt and also being able to work with all kinds of different people, different crew members from different countries from all over the world is certainly part of the excitement of everything. I came ashore as the Marine Superintendent of Operations for a couple of companies, so I would deal with the fleet. I was the kind of the middle person between the ships and the shore side, the managing board, and I would help the ships with dry docking and make sure that we had all the materials and things we needed to keep ships operational. And then eventually I found myself in here as a director for the Center for Marine Simulation. So in a kind of a way, I've come full circle. I've brought things that I've picked up and I've learned and skill sets and abilities, and also the network and the knowledge that I've amassed, to come back around and to kind of help build up this facility and help young people who are coming into the industry, and also people formerly like myself who are already seasoned and experienced individuals to utilize the equipment here to help prepare for all kinds of different operations. So on a day-to-day basis, this facility does a lot of different things. We sometimes can simulate ships operating in the Arctic and help people prepare for voyages in ice. We do work for offshore oil and gas operations. So if I stand up here and then I take a little look around, and you can see behind me here, we're actually sitting on an anchor handler that's operating on the Grand Banks. And off in the distance, you'll see an oil rig, and you'll see some supply boats and some things like that. So people would come here to prepare for that type of operation. And we also do specialized training for people who are going to be operating equipment like dynamic positioning and all kinds of interesting stuff. So it's very professionalized and very, very specialized types of things we do here. And sometimes we help prepare people or companies for a really difficult operation. They'll come in and use some of our simulators to help their teams prepare for a really challenging condition. This could be something different, as the ship is going into an area where she's never gone before. Or it can also be for a tow out, a towing of one of these big structures offshore, how difficult that's going to be, how risky it's going to be, what happens if things go wrong. And so that's kind of a little bit of the day-to-day. But we've also moved into some interesting things like how people get tired and how they get fatigued, or even things like seasickness. Because we have such specialized equipment here, we've done some work with researchers who've come to utilize our equipment because we can recreate conditions and scenarios and situations that are, you would have to be actually on a ship far away and out at sea in order to be able to replicate. And so part of what we do here is we allow people to access as close to realistic conditions as possible. And so that's part of, what our mandate would be. And again, we support the cadet programs here at the Institute. Broadly speaking, the Marine Institute does everything from, the nautical science that I would have gone through, to marine engineering, to naval architecture and marine systems design, and also down into the bridge watch and the marine diesel mechanics. So the more vocational type applications, and even higher level up to degree, master's and PhD in very specific sciences, all related to the maritime industry. So that's kind of what I do in a nutshell. It keeps me quite occupied. I used to travel quite a great deal before the COVID situation came down, because I would be working with regulators and international companies to help them perfect what it is they're going to do. But, with COVID and the situation that's in place now, we found other ways to do it. A lot of questions that sometimes people ask, people who are on the water, is like, how big are the storms, or how rough does it actually get? Storms are like part of our working career, and we do have to deal with them from time to time. It's not something we like or something we enjoy, but it's just part of the job at times. And it's getting the ship from one place to another. It's really what it's all about. Ships operate on a 24-hour cycle. We don't take holidays, and there are no weekends. And sometimes you're away for quite long periods of time. You can be gone for several months in some cases, or sometimes it can be a lot shorter. It really varies from company to company and the type of trade that the ship is actually operating in. So Canada, you'd be surprised to know, is actually quite an important maritime nation. Even though our fleet, our merchant marine fleet, is a little bit small in comparison to a lot of countries, a lot of the goods, a lot of the things that come out of Canada are either imported or exported. A lot of things go to the United States, but you think about all the grain that's grown out in the prairies, or a lot of the wood that comes off the west coast out in BC, or manufactured goods leaves Canada and it goes onto a ship and it goes internationally. So this is carried by ship. The same is true for things coming into the country. Think about out on the West Coast, a lot of the ships that are coming across from Asia, the container ships that are arriving here and bringing materials and goods and things that we use every day, including some of the food that we eat. So it's quite an important industry. If in a worldwide sense, 90% of all world's trade is carried out by ships. So if ships were to stop sailing all of a sudden, things would change very quickly. So it's quite an important industry, and a lot of people are not really that aware of it. If you go down, based on wherever your class is to, if you see a ship, you know, you get a little bit of an idea about what it's actually doing. It may be waiting to load cargo, or it may be waiting to drop off cargo, but that's going to be used by somebody somewhere. And so if you think about the types of things that make it interesting, is where the ship is going to after it finishes here, and who's on board it, and you know, what are they dealing with. From a technology point of view, ships are they're very expensive to build, and they're very expensive to maintain and to operate, because they're in the worst operating conditions you could possibly find. Obviously, the ocean can play quite a level of damage, and can put a lot of forces expose a ship to a lot of different conditions. So the ships are built very well. And this is what the naval architects do. They design a ship based on what the thing is going to do. If it's going to be an oil tanker, it's going to carry oil. If it's going to be a bulk carrier, it's going to carry all kinds of interesting stuff. And it's going to go somewhere. So it has to be designed and fit for purpose. And this is a very specialized process. There are enormous shipyards. If you can think about something out of science fiction, and you go to to a shipyard and actually see a ship being built, it's like something out of science fiction. Enormous blocks, bigger than 3 or 4 houses all put together, that are all assembled in large pieces to build a ship that's nearly 1,000 feet long. It's quite an impressive process. I just saw that there's some questions coming in.
Oh, yes. Okay, so how do ships have access to the internet? Question number 1.
That's a really good question. That's been a problem for a very long time, because ships sail so far away. For a very long time, we would be out of communications range, particularly deep sea. If you were crossing the Atlantic or crossing the Pacific. But when satellites started to appear in space, in orbit above the planet, we used to rely on a satellite-based system for communication. So we would bounce our internet off of satellites between ship and shore. Now, this has certainly improved, because as wireless has become much better and the distances are greater, we can pick up internet quite far offshore. You'd be surprised what we can get. And it's actually a really good idea, because when you're on board a ship and you want to check in on your family, or even communicate with people on shore, then internet actually works. And so it's certainly improved from where it was. But satellite communication still plays a large part. But as the broadband and the wireless networks become better, then that's closing the gap. To be sure, there are still parts of the planet that you can't get internet, but it's getting smaller all the time.
So question 2, is there a position above captain on a ship?
No.
So captain is the highest.
When you were the captain, when you were the master, you were the end. You are the final decision in anything. Now that means you work with the team. Obviously, you have the chief engineer and the chief officer, and you have that management group, and then you have people on shore who you also work with. But the final decision for everything, particularly when it comes to the safety of the people on board, the safety of the ship, and the environment, is the captain's final responsibility.
Okay. So question number 3, you mentioned ships running 24 hours a day. What type of schedule is in place?
So ships, a day in a ship is broken up into what we call a watch, and it's essentially like a shift. And so the watches are broken up. There could be let's say there's 3. And it runs on a 24-hour cycle of these 3 watches. So you'll have a group of people on duty for 4 hours, and then they're off for 8 hours, and then another group comes on duty, and then another group comes on duty after that. There's always somebody, typically up on the bridge or many oftentimes in the engine room, unless they have what's called an unmanned engine room. But there's always somebody on duty and aware and moving around on board a ship. So depending on if the ship is a tanker, so an oil tanker is going to sail somewhere, they're going to go into a port and they're going to load or discharge oil, then there's always somebody working to oversee that and also to pump that oil off or pump it on. And so depending on the type of ship, it's focused around getting the ship safely somewhere, getting it back from somewhere, and also doing the work of the ship. If it's a container ship, it's overseeing how the containers are loaded. So that's what I mean by 24 hours. There's always somebody on duty. There's always somebody doing something on board a ship.
Okay, thanks. Lots of questions. So next question. Do you enjoy your job?
I do. I get to play with all kinds of cool stuff. And I have a really great team here. The people who are in this center are awesome. We've got a combination of operational people like me who are to sea and have that expertise, but we also have a lot of technical people who are really good at their jobs. We because the simulators run on math models, we have a naval architect and a database person who are like programmers. They're very technical. And they develop the math models. So think like the Matrix. Everybody remembers the movie The Matrix. We create these three-dimensional, fully operational ship models, and we load them into the simulators. And so like I'm in now, we get to come down on a ship, and it actually moves like the real ship will move. And so working with these people is really interesting. And some of the jobs and some of the projects we do are really interesting as well. A few years ago, we actually modeled Titanic for a study to look at what would have happened if she had to turn. If they had seen the iceberg a little bit faster and she started to turn away from the iceberg faster, what would have actually happened? Would they have missed the iceberg? And so that was a really interesting project. It was pretty cool.
Wow, that's very cool. So the next question is, what do you think is the most imported or exported item by ship?
Wow, that's a lot. That's a big question. Obviously, there's an old saying that God must have been a ship owner because he put resources on one side and people that need them on the other side, and then put the ocean in between everything. And so the most valuable in terms of just the sheer number is the goods that are coming out of the manufacturing base in Asia. So think about all the container ships. Remember, if everybody remembers back in March when that container ship got stuck in the middle of the Suez Canal, not only did that hold up traffic and supply, it's probably costing billions of dollars in damages and claims because people didn't get their materials on time. They didn't get their cell phones on time, or they didn't get their sneakers on time. And the stores and the shops, they all are, they had a loss. And so they're looking to recoup that. So, goods like that are obviously very high value, but oil as well. Oil is tremendously valuable and it's very volatile. So the price of oil, as we see, rises and falls. And that impacts, the amount of oil that's being shipped around on the planet. But then you have things like bulk cargoes, like iron ore and these sorts of things. But generally speaking, yes, the containerized traffic and the oil cargoes are very high value.
Yeah, when that ship was stuck in the Suez, that was like everything was at a standstill.
It was a big event. People don't realize. I mean,
Hmm.
there are main arteries around the world. So certain types of ships go certain places all the time. They follow these specific routes. And that's because shipping is the most cost-effective way to get a large amount of something from one place to another. And so
Hmm.
you have things like the Suez Canal and the Panama Canal, these two very vital arteries that are in the middle of the world, where a lot of ships take a shortcut. If you're coming from Asia and you're going to Europe, it's easier to go through the Suez Canal and shorter than come all the way around the bottom of Africa and then come up along the coast. And so you can think of all the shipping and all the things that are coming from these places. And to have this enormous ship stuck in the middle of that is quite a roadblock. It was quite an event, and as I say, billions of dollars held up. I think the number I saw one time was like 14 billion a day or something like that in lost production.
Wow. Okay, so more questions coming in. So number 6, we know that the sea is unforgiving. What is the most challenging situation you have faced on the water?
More than a few. More than a few. We actually had a problem with part of our ship where we had flooding, and the ship started to flood while we were in the middle of the ocean, and that was a very serious issue. But luckily, we had very good crew, and we were able to get control of the situation to prevent anything worse from happening. But we were prepared, I can tell you, for possibly having to get off the ship. I've also been on a ship where we had an explosion, unfortunately, and luckily we were alongside, but nobody got hurt, thank God. It was on an oil tanker, and there was some trapped gas down in one of the cargo tanks. We were doing some repairs. One time I was in the Arctic, this is when I was very young. I was still a cadet. I was on a barge next to the ship, and I actually drifted away in the ice pack from the ship and went well out the sound. And so that was a pretty interesting adventure. But a lot of storm situations too. I've been in some really bad weather at times, or been caught, and there's nothing to do but slow the ship down and take it easy and be prepared, and just wait through the worst of it till eventually the weather passes and you come out the other side. So that's a few instances. Certainly, it's a challenging career. It's not for everybody, but if you do it and you want to stay with it, you will see some amazing things and go to some interesting places. That's for sure.
Mm-hmm. So a similar question is, have you ever witnessed a ship in distress or sinking, and what happened?
I've never seen a ship sink. That would be pretty ominous. I've come like as part of an operation one time. We did have a ship that did have some trouble, and we were very close by, and we did come alongside. It wasn't something that would cause the ship to have sunk, but they had a problem with their power supply. So we just came along, and we tied onto them for a little while, and we provided them some power. Then we took them under tow for a little while until they were able to fix their problems, and then we were able to carry on again. But I've never seen a ship sink. But I should point out, as part of all that as mariners, as people on ships, we do a lot of training around situations. We have to fight our own fires, and so we do very advanced firefighting training. Because I can tell you, I've never had the experience, but the scariest thing, apart from having to abandon ship, is fighting a fire on a ship. It is a very, very, very serious issue. And we train for survival. We are essentially a small city, and so we have to be able to do everything that you would find in a small city, including first aid, advanced first aid, all these sorts of things. So we don't want it to happen, but we do prepare for it. And as a matter of fact, we actually do drills. We prepare for all kinds of really bad situations.
Okay, so a little less ominous of a question. How much food do you store on a ship?
It's never enough, it seems like. We store food is a very expensive proposition on board ships. We store enough food, obviously, to maintain the crew. If you have a large crew, you're eating a lot of food. But it depends really on the number of people on board and for how long you're going to be between different ports. Normally, the food services, the food orders are done up in advance. And we keep a very large stock of, obviously, some food goes bad, and we don't want food going bad, so that's consumed very quickly. But we try and just keep ahead of it by ordering enormous amounts of food well ahead in time. Because some places the ships may go, they may not have resources to be able to get food on board, or very little, and so they have to have, they may not be able to get food there, but they can get them in maybe the next port. But it's not normally too big of an issue in most cases, but there have been times, yes, where you're on an extended period of time and things are running low. It gets to be a bit of a problem. But as I say, we do keep a lot of non-perishable food on board. So it depends on how good the cook is too at being able to make sure that he can make food last long.
So this is a question about the Titanic simulation. Do you do projects like that often?
No, as a matter of fact, that was very unique. And it was one of 3 that we did that were kind of, a little bit interesting like that. The first one we had done was related to a very famous Newfoundland Arctic explorer, a captain named Bob Bartlett, who brought a ship up into the high Arctic and actually assisted this guy named Robert Peary to nominally discovered the North Pole. And so we recreated parts of that voyage in the ship. We rebuilt the ship called the Roosevelt, and we let people see what it was like to sail into ice. And then we did the Titanic. And as I say, that was quite an interesting piece of work. We were contacted by a television company, or a television crew, and a film company from the BBC, the British Broadcasting Corporation, to participate in an event. They were doing a documentary on some little known things about the Titanic, and they'd heard about our facility and our ability to be able to recreate things. And so they asked us, was it possible? And we said, listen, we'll try it. We can't validate the performance, but there was very interesting information came out of that documentary for our own selves. Like, people think the Titanic wasn't very maneuverable, and she actually was. She was highly maneuverable. She was built with the best of what was available at the time, and unfortunately the accident occurred. The other one I can think of is, and this is actually quite apt, given tomorrow is November 11th and Remembrance Day, we actually rebuilt an entire convoy from the Second World War, including the cargo ships and the corvettes that would have protected the ships crossing the Atlantic, and submarines. And we let people see what it was like to be in the Battle of the Atlantic at the height of some terrible times. And that was very dramatic, to replicate and to pull off. And we delivered that for the centenary of the Navy. So that was a couple of years ago, but it was quite a big piece of work.
That's very, very cool. So another question is, what goals have you set for yourself, and how do you achieve your goals?
It's a great question. It's not one that's easily answered. I mean, throughout my career at sea, particularly, my goals were driven by the fact that I wanted to achieve what I wanted to be. I wanted to be a captain, and I mapped out for myself, or charted out for myself, as we'd say at sea, the plan to get there. So I knew the time I would have to spend at sea. I knew the examinations and the training and the education I would have to get at each level. I took a long time to be sure. I always spoke a lot and was around every type of thing that was going on the ship. So I always was talking with the senior officers and made sure that I was included wherever I could be to gain the experience. I wasn't afraid to ask questions. Never be afraid to ask questions, and never be afraid to volunteer or take part in things. And so that guided me at each step as I went through all the way to master. And even then, I came to realize that you'll never know everything. And so always be open and communicative. Like I spent a lot of time talking with the people on our ships. And so when I didn't know something, I had to be sure that I didn't know it, and I would look for somebody who maybe did know some things. So I always had this objective of trying to be open to people who do have expertise or experiences that I don't know. In terms of what I do now, it's very much driven by technology and by trying to ensure that our people who are in our facility get the best training they have to help them do their jobs. Obviously, I have objectives that are set for me as a director for a facility. I need to achieve and to accomplish certain things. And it's really by looking at what's going on in the shipping industry, where I think they're going to go and what's going to happen, and being able to have our equipment ready and updated and prepared for the type of operation. So to give you an example of that, think about this idea around small remote control ships or autonomous ships that either are run by people on shore or even have some sort of an artificial intelligence component. So being able to participate in those types of research projects and have our equipment ready to go is kind of an objective that I have right now, something that I need to be ready for. So it's basically really driven by me trying to figure out where I need to be and what I need to do to get there. That's what kind of drives what I'm doing now.
Excellent advice. So how do you stay committed to studying your profession over a period of years?
That's a good question as well. It's an education thing. So I still do education courses. I do things at the university. You can go right through from a bachelor program right through to a PhD in the types of things that we do in maritime sciences. So that's a continued professional development and continued skills element. I'm also I've been a long member of an organization called the Company of Master Mariners, which is an entity in Canada that represents all the Master Mariners, people who have achieved that level. And we are essentially a foundation. We provide scholarships and mentoring to young people coming into the industry. And so being part of that has provided me, the ability to discuss and to talk with my peers and the other people in the industry on things that are going on, and maintain that situational awareness. And also just by nature of the job, I do a lot of research and I keep up to date on a lot of things that are going on inside the shipping industry and even how ships are built or operated. It's a full-time job for me.
Okay, so the last question we have here is, any tips for someone who is interested in pursuing this career?
Yes, come to the Marine Institute. Yeah, what you should do is, in all honesty, is of course, like, consider what aspect of shipping you want to get into. If you want to get into the operational side, to actually go to sea, to either be a navigational officer or an engineering officer, because you may be interested in that side of things too, on the engineering. The good people who keep the engine and operating systems of a ship going. So you may be interested in that side. You may be interested in the naval architecture, the design, the people who actually design the ships, and the systems design people who create all the technology and equipment that go into the ship. And so, like, checking out a site like, the Marine Institute's website in terms of some of the programs that are open and available to you, or even for ocean technology, if you want to be an ROV pilot, the person who operates and drives the little small remote control subs that are crawling around on the bottom looking at the Titanic. There's a lot of resources available out there. And, through this organization, if anybody has any further questions on getting answers on what they can do and where they can go, I'd be happy to provide.
Yes, absolutely. You can definitely reach out to Ships to Shores or Cove, and we can reach out to Chris. So are there any swaths of ocean that are a no-go, are too dangerous, unforgiving, or restless for ships?
There are areas that are very famous for being rough, I can tell you that. The North Atlantic, obviously, which is off the coast here, out on the Grand Banks and in the Mid-Atlantic, is famous for, storms that come together. I once spent 21 days trying to cross the Atlantic from just storm after storm slowed us down. Operating in the Arctic, it's not a no-go, but it's done very carefully. And that's because not only is there, there's still a lot of water there, it's uncharted, so you don't know where the rocks are underneath, and it can be very shallow. But also because of the ice, the land masses surrounded, whatever islands are there, are surrounded by extremely thick ice, and you have to have a very specialized ship to go there, and you had to have very specialized training. But it's also, anybody who operates in the Arctic on a ship is very aware of how pristine the environment is, and nobody wants to harm the environment whatsoever. So it's areas that, that around islands or in channels or waterways that are ecologically important, that, ships tend to be very careful about going. An example of that would be in this Gulf of St. Lawrence now. I mean, the ships have a voluntary, although it's now mandatory, reduction in speed because of the northern right whale population that's there, and none of us want to hit the whales. We want to make sure they're there as well, and so we slow our speeds and we keep a very close eye out for them because we don't want to hurt the whales. We want to carry on with our business and let them carry on with theirs. And like that, yes, and there are parts of the world where unfortunately there are, very troublesome issues, and it's very dangerous, and so typically ships only go there if absolutely necessary. I mean, there is a problem with piracy still in parts of the Indian Ocean where the navies of various countries are involved and they have to provide escorts or even sometimes chase pirates away. And so those are areas that you have to be very cautious about operating, and you need to be very well prepared.
Thanks. So we have 4 minutes left. So Christopher, you can give some concluding remarks, or if there's any final questions, we can fit a couple in before we move to Carol Ann.
So I'm certainly open to any more questions if anybody has anything else. But as I say, I'll certainly be providing information through to the Ships to Shore group if there's any other things that people want to contact us about, or they have any other follow-up or points that you're interested in. I'm very happy to have participated in this, and I'm very glad to be able to provide a little bit of insight in terms of the things that I do and the things that we do in this facility, and just generally about the shipping industry as a whole.
Yes. Thank you so much, Captain Hearn. That was a really eye-opening presentation, and I also just want to thank the class for their wonderful questions. You guys asked some really good stuff. So we're going to move now to Carol-Ann Black. She's going to be presenting for about 20 minutes, and then we'll have about 10 minutes for question and answer. So like always, you can post it in the chat when you have questions. So welcome, Carol-Ann.
Hi, I'm really excited to be here with all of you today. And actually, I'm even more excited that you are all getting involved with this program with Ships to Shores, because it's so wonderful to see youth getting involved in the blue economy and taking an interest in our ocean and our waters, and also understanding or thinking about what our connection is to the ocean. Because it doesn't matter where we live, we have a connection to the ocean. And so what I do is a little bit different from what you've just heard about. I'm an ocean science writer. And so everything that I do has to do with this connection. So it's helping people to understand how they are connected to the ocean, or to learn more and be inspired by the ocean. And then I also do writing that helps women and some other underrepresented groups, or people who are not as involved in ocean careers, to get into doing ocean careers. And I can talk a little bit more about that if there are questions about that. So I wondered first, maybe Gabrielle, if you could tell me, I know that you're in Ontario. Where in the province is the class?
We are based in Toronto.
Okay, so are you like right near Lake Ontario, or are you closer to a river?
We're pretty close to the lake. We're in Scarborough, so not far away from the Scarborough Bluffs, which go into Lake Ontario.
Okay, thanks.
And I'm actually a sailor on Lake Ontario.
Oh, wonderful. So the point is that in Toronto, you're still connected to the ocean in a whole variety of ways. So you're right on Lake Ontario, which flows into the St. Lawrence and out into the Gulf of St. Lawrence, a major estuary of Canada that you were hearing about from the captain just now as well, and out into the Atlantic Ocean. And as well, the ocean has impacts on us no matter where we are in terms of our climate, and in terms of the water cycle. So I also am in Ontario. I'm in Ottawa, and I'm located on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. And so to think more about this connection that we all have with the ocean, that's what led me to write my book that I'm going to be reading from today. It's called Oli's Ocean Adventures. And this is, again, because we are all connected to the ocean, and I really wanted to help youth to feel and grow that connection. And so the book is about a 10-year-old boy. His name is Oli. He lives in Ottawa, and he's a little bit embarrassed by some of the things that his parents do. They do things like show up on their bikes in the middle of winter to pick him up after school instead of in a car. They do things like picking up new furniture from neighbor's lawn instead of buying new things. Oli is a bit embarrassed by these activities, and he thinks that maybe his parents could use some more money so that they could get a car, or so that they could buy new furniture. But when we're thinking about like the environment and the ocean, I bet that a bunch of you could have some ideas about why maybe his parents were doing this that didn't have to do with money. Oli, though, what he does is he decides, because he just loves pirates so much, that he wants to sneak aboard a pirate ship, get some treasure, and his plan is to give that to his parents so they can get a car, get new furniture, that sort of thing. He does this by sneaking on board a Canadian Coast Guard research vessel. So this is actually an interesting connection that we have in Canada, where the Canadian Coast Guard only thinks that they are there to protect the coast. Pirates, okay, he can find a pirate ship through the Coast Guard. when in actuality, our Coast Guard, part of what they do is help to run these major research programs that are full of scientists. So Ole goes on vacation with his parents to Halifax on the east coast of Canada and Nova Scotia, and he sneaks on board a Canadian Coast Guard research vessel, but hasn't realized that's what he's done exactly until he gets to sea. And that research vessel, it turns out, he cannot get off. And here's a picture of it. So this is the CCGS, the Canadian Coast Guard ship, Kellerman. And this ship is about to go all the way around the Canadian coast. Let's see, starting over here in the East Coast and all the way through the longest coastline in the world. And the section that I'm going to read from to start here is when Ole, he's at sea, he's been found out. He was hidden, but he's been found out. He's sitting on the ship. He's met Mark, who's one of the ship's crew. He's a Canadian Coast Guard staff, and he's about to meet one of the scientific staff as well. And so he's out on deck. Ole was still gazing happily out to sea when he heard voices coming toward him. One after another, a group of at least 30 men and women came out on deck. They headed for the bow of the ship, leaned on the railing and looked out to sea, putting their hands up to shield their eyes from the glare, and some using binoculars. Were they looking for a pirate ship? Ole wondered. He pressed in amongst them to see. It had gotten quiet. The men and women continued to scan the sea, and Ole wanted to get closer. The ship rocked and caused Ole to bump into a man's back. The man turned, saw no one, and was confused until he looked down and up on his eyebrows. Whoops, I think I found a boy. Does anyone know why I've just found a boy in the middle of the North Atlantic? He said, looking about. The group looked at Ole, and then they looked at each other. I do, sir, said Ole. Oh, of course, go on then. Well, sir, I've run away to sea. I see. Well, we are at sea now, aren't we? At that, he turned back to looking at the waves. Somebody said, Dr. Clear, don't you think we've got to find out about getting him home to his parents? That's all right, said Ole. They know I'm here. See, there's no problem. Wait, they do? Said the man that somebody had called Dr. Clear. Yes, sir. The captain called them, and they know when to pick me up at the Institute of Ocean Sciences in BC. Right, of course. There's no way to get a boy off the ship now, is there? Doesn't look that way, sir, said Ole. Dr. Clear turned back out to sea, and so did the rest of the somebodies. This time, Ole gently poked Dr. Clear in the back. Can I please see too? Right, of course. He made room for Ole at the rail. Are we looking for a pirate ship? We're looking for Riley. Pirate ship, did you say? No. Riley is one of our turtles, with her head and tail. Oh, is that all? Interrupted Ole. He thought someone had lost their pet. She's about 1.5 meters across, continued Dr. Clear. How big is that? How big is 1.5 meters? It's long, not big. And it's about, well, almost as long as you are tall, said Dr. Clear. Wow, turtles get that big? Well, yes, turtles like Riley do. She's a leatherback turtle. Right, so Riley's shell is about over 1 meter long and wide, and she's dark bluish black and may have her head sticking out above the water. He paused. We met Riley near Halifax, along with 9 other leatherback turtles. We glued a tracking device to each of their shells and have been watching them as they travel through the Atlantic Ocean. We use GPS like your parents do in their car. Ole started to say that his parents didn't have a car, but didn't get a chance. Right, so we were out here because Riley has stopped swimming in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. She appears to be bobbing about. We're as close to her location as we can get. Now we've got to spot her. Oh, said Ole, who had forgotten about his disappointment in not seeing pirates. He was too busy trying to spot the humongous turtle. Then he remembered and reached into his backpack for his homemade spyglass. He pulled it out to its full length and held it to his eye. Truthfully, it didn't work well. Ole saw best when he looked almost straight down, close to the ship. Then he saw something. Is that her there? Said Ole. Is that who where? Said Dr. Clear. He was distractedly looking out to sea along with everyone else. Only Ole was searching by the side of the ship. Isn't that a turtle right down next to the ship? Wow, you're right, there she is. The group chattered excitedly as they pointed out the turtle to one another. Dr. Clear called out, Mark, she's over here. Ole looked in the direction Dr. Clear was shouting. Mark was sitting at the controls of a bright orange crane that sat on the deck of the ship. It had a big white net at the end. He swung it over the side and quickly lowered it. Two women wearing helmets and harnesses leaned over the side of the ship and helped to maneuver the net around the turtle. Riley was pulled out of the water and swung onto the deck. The group crowded around the turtle, which wasn't moving. One person got down on all fours and examined her up close. She was even bigger than Ole had imagined, and she had flippers instead of feet, like the little turtles Ole had seen along the Ottawa River. Her shell had ridges that went from her front end to her back end, and it did look to be covered in a leathery skin. A piece of electronic equipment had been glued to her shell. That must be the tracking device, thought Ole. What wasn't right was she had something white and plasticky sticking out of her mouth. She's still alive, the examiner called out. What's wrong with her? Ole asked. She's eaten a plastic bag, or possibly several, said Dr. Clear. That seems silly. Why would a turtle eat a plastic bag? Said Ole. She's mistaken the bag for jellyfish. Sea turtles like Riley love to eat jellyfish. A plastic bag underwater looks like a jellyfish to a turtle. Then they brought the turtle inside on a kind of forklift. Where are they taking her? Asked Ole. She'll have a little nap and the surgeons will work on getting the plastic bag out of her throat and stomach. It looks like we got to her on time, but we can't be sure. The surgeons will do their best, and we'll have to see after that. Now I will ruin the next little bit. She made it. Don't worry. Riley did well, and here she is in the holding tank. So I'll note I got to work on this book with a really talented illustrator and designer who did the map that I showed you, and then some pictures throughout the book. And so the next section, and the last one that I'm going to read, is when Riley is being held in a tank on the ship. There are these big cylindrical tanks till she gets better and she can be released back into the ocean. And Ole has gotten involved with helping to feed Riley. So she's showing up in the lab, and we're going to see Mark again and Dr. Clear. And Ole has started to learn about food on these ships, and he seems to always come equipped with a cookie. When Ole arrived at the turtle lab, he found Mark already there, cleaning the inside walls of Riley's plexiglass tank. He was standing on a stepladder and holding a long pole with a brush on the end. Hi there, Ole, said Mark. Ole saluted with his cookie. Riley eyed the end of the brush as Mark scrubbed the walls of the turtle's temporary home. Then Riley spied Ole. After a few days aboard, Riley would swim up to the side of her tank when Ole came into the room. She would prop her chin and one flipper on the side of the tank and flap her flipper excitedly at Ole. Ole wondered if she liked him or it was only the vegetables. He liked to think it was both. Okay, he liked to think it was him she liked. Ole walked over to the turtle. Hi, Riley, you're a good sea turtle. He patted her flipper. Then to Mark, he said, I found the room where the goodies are. There's always food to be eaten around here. Did you know the freezer in the mess hall is open all the time, that you can get popsicles or ice cream anytime you like? Ole's eyes nearly popped out of his head. He'd only ever eaten those things when he'd been offered one at some other kid's house, which wasn't nearly enough, or often enough in his opinion. Ole took a last bite of cookie and began digging around in the fridge to find Riley's supper. He heard footsteps and looked over. Dr. Clear had come bustling into the room. He leaned over the side of the tank and looked at the turtle and then sat down at a nearby computer. He looked busy, so Ole got back to his digging. Dr. Clear called out, Under your care, Mark, that turtle is recovering beautifully. It's not me, Dr. Clear. Ole's the one who's getting her fit again, he said, pointing with his head toward the bottom sticking out of the fridge. Hoy, Oli, called Dr. Clear. Good work, lad. Next thing you want to be an oceanographer like me or in the Coast Guard like Mark. Would that mean I get to go to sea all the time and feed sea turtles and always eat in the mess hall? Oli asked. Yep, it would, said Dr. Clear, laughing. The only difference is if you're a scientist, you eat in the officers' mess hall. Then he turned back to his computer and his work. Mark, who passed Oli to put the tank brush away, touched Oli's back and said, "We're glad you got assigned to eat with us." Oli smiled. Oli began cutting and preparing Riley's dinner. He had by now learned that all those people who had come out on deck to look for Riley were a combination of scientists, students, and Coast Guard crew members. Oli held out some shoots of asparagus, and the turtle stuck out her long neck and broke off the ends. Then Oli threw the rest into the tank and watched as she eyed them and thrust her head out to get them. It was as though she was lunging at prey that might try to flee. Oli pictured vegetables with fins swimming away and giggled. Riley dipped down into her tank and swam around in a circle to the bottom and back up again. She was a graceful swimmer. She didn't flail about like Oli was sure he did. While Riley worked on a carrot, Oli looked over at Dr. Clear's computer screen. It displayed a map with a series of beeping dots at the end of crazy-looking squiggling lines. "What's that, Dr. Clear?" asked Oli. Oh, yes, come here and look. These are our sea turtles. We're following them, tracking them to see where they go. Oli, the ocean is one connected whole. We have different names for each ocean, but the turtles don't care. They travel all around the world. We didn't know they traveled so far until we started tracking them. All our turtles are ladies. Every year they crawl up onto warm beaches, not in Canada, much farther south, and lay their eggs in the sand. And they bury the eggs and go back into the ocean. The eggs hatch and the baby turtles crawl into the water. Do they meet their parents there? Asked Oli. Nope. Baby turtles are on their own from the moment their eggs are laid. Lots will become the food of other animals, but some will grow up to be big turtles like Riley. They can live to be over 100 years old. Wow, cool, said Oli. It really is cool, isn't it? Since I'm an oceanographer, I get to find out new things about the turtles. I hope to keep them safe. People shouldn't throw plastic bags in the ocean, said Oli. That's right, they shouldn't. Dr. Clear paused and appeared to be thinking. Right, so look at this, Oli, he said, and then brought up a different map on his screen. He typed in Ottawa, and the map showed the city and its rivers and canal. You see Ottawa here? Yes, said Oli. Ottawa has 2 rivers and a canal. The Ottawa River, the Rideau River, and the Rideau Canal, right? I think so, said Oli. So the Rideau River and canal, which way did they flow? Oli thought about it. He'd bucked along the path of water a zillion times with his parents. They both flow to the Ottawa River. That's right. Do you know which way the Ottawa River flows? Well, from our house, it flows towards Parliament, said Oli. Where do you live? Oli pointed to the left side of the map. Your house is west of Parliament. So that means it flows east? Right again, said Dr. Clear. If I zoom out like this, you can see the Ottawa River flows along here. He pointed to the blue curvy line until it reaches the St. Lawrence River here. And the St. Lawrence also flows to the east. Here he paused and zoomed out again until a big blue area and the words Atlantic Ocean appeared on the right-hand side. Oli said the St. Lawrence flows into the Atlantic Ocean. That means the water from the Ottawa River and the Rideau Canal and the Rideau River all flow there too. You're right, keep going, said Dr. Clear. I get it. If someone throws a plastic bag on the ground in Ottawa and rain washes it into the river, it could ride the river until it ends up in the ocean. Just so, just so. My gosh, said Oli, we've got to tell everyone in Ottawa to make sure not to throw trash in the river. They're going to kill the turtles. I'm sure the people of Ottawa don't litter on purpose, but yes, they should be certain not to let any trash or recyclables go into the river. One of the best ways to do that is to clean up the shorelines. I can do that. I'll tell everyone, said Oli. I like your attitude. Kids like you can do anything. It's us adults who have trouble. This is important. He looked straight into Oli's eyes and didn't blink. He said, Oli, adults have been told what is and is not possible. You're a kid, and that's very different. That means anything is possible. Do you understand? Sort of. It's a wonderful thing, Oli, because if you don't know something is impossible, then you'll try it. And if you try it, you may find that it isn't impossible. Instead, it is possible, and you've done it. And so you can probably guess that they were able to save the turtle. And the last picture I'll show here is when they're releasing Riley back into the Atlantic Ocean. I think that covers it for me.
Thank you so much, Carol Ann. That's a really lovely story. Do we have any questions for Carol Ann? We've got about 10 minutes. So what did you study to become a marine author in high school or university?
I'll answer for myself, but there are different ways that you could go about it for sure. So what I studied was sciences and maths. And so then in high school, I made sure to get all of the requirements so that I could continue in university to do some sort of sciences. And then in university, I did a degree in physics, and I also studied geography at that time. And then after that, I did a master's degree in physical oceanography, which is like the physics of the ocean. So looking at waves and currents and sorts of things. So that's the way the route that I took. And so it's very much the science route. And then I've always loved writing. And so to become a science writer, like a marine author, I started writing about the ocean for the school newspaper when I was in graduate school. And I just started doing any sort of writing that I possibly could, blogging. And it wasn't even all related to the ocean. I wrote a travel blog when my spouse and I went traveling, that sort of thing. So it's just, for writing, a lot of it has to do with practicing and doing it as much as you possibly can. And then I got good enough, so I started to be able to make connections and get work as an ocean writer, marine author. Mm-hmm. I hope that kind of answers it. I think it's interesting too, though, that you can come at science writing from a completely different angle. Like you could do like fine arts, or you could do creative writing and that sort of thing, or you could do journalism, and it just brings in a totally different angle and perspective. So for me, the advantage was that I knew ocean sciences and the ocean really well, and that was the strength that I brought in my writing. But you could equally beautifully learn some other skills and then come at the topic, like the ocean, with a little bit less knowledge, but like more curiosity. So you come at it more like from the perspective of the person who might be reading what you're going to be writing. So you might ask the question that they might have. So there are different ways that you can get to something like where I am.
Awesome. I also just wanted to say, I think, Carol Ann, what you do is a perfect mix of science and art, and it shows you that you can pursue both things even in one career, and that's exactly what Full Steam Ahead is trying to do, is to bring science and art together. So I think that's really awesome. So the next question is, what inspired you to write the book?
It was a couple of things. So my son is Oli, and now he was 6 months old when I started writing the book, and now he's about to be 7. So it was definitely him and us living in Ottawa, which felt really far from the ocean. But I have realized that we really are still connected to it, and that it's also important for everyone to understand some of the connections related to our climate and how we can have different impacts on the ocean and how it impacts us. And so that was a big part of the inspiration. And then I wanted my mom, who's on I'm 38 now, and I have a mom who comes to things, so I wish that on everyone. And my mom, who is a school teacher, told me that I should aim for this sort of age range that's maybe 10 to 13, because then I might be able to inspire some youth to, like, that's the right age where you might decide, oh my gosh, I love the ocean, or I want to be an oceanographer, I want to be in the Coast Guard, I want to, they're just to really inspire someone in a way that might change their lives. So that was, those were the inspirations, I'd say.
Mm-hmm. The next question is, how did you become interested in ocean physiology?
So what my background is physical oceanography. Is that what we're?
Yeah, probably. Mm-hmm.
Probably, because physiology is more in the biological side of things. But actually, what's so interesting about the ocean is how these different domains or disciplines interact. You can't have biology without the physics. So like, if you want to have plants growing in the ocean, they've got to be moved into an area that has light, and that's going to be ocean currents that are moving them around. Or like how on land there are nutrients in the soil that plants use. But in the ocean, those nutrients that are still in the soil, they're in the sediment, they have to come up into the water so that plants can use them to grow. And so you need different kinds of current processes that move these things around. So it's I always found it fascinating to think that something that's not moving in the ocean, like you're a turtle and you're like, I'm just going to have a nap, and it keeps moving. It's just always, there's no way to just kind of, I mean, no way you can sit on the bottom, or there are places where there aren't currents, but there's just all these different interactions between the different disciplines. So it's really fascinating. And then the other piece that's really interesting about learning about the ocean is how tactile it is. And what I mean is that you can touch it, you can go out to sea, you can get in it. Because I had done physics as a science, and that's often looking at things that are very, very far away, like astronomy, or looking at things that are very, very small that you need an instrument to look at. And in the ocean, it's like you can be on it. Like I got to go to sea on a Canadian Coast Guard vessel as part of the requirements for my master's degree program. And I, again, wish that on everyone.
Do you have any more questions for Carol-Ann? Actually, I have a question. What's your favorite part of your job?
Ooh, talking to people. Yeah, I do a lot of interviews, and I talk to a lot of very inspiring people who work in oceans and love it. And these are people all around the world in different places, in Fiji and South Africa and France and the UK and Canada, all across Canada and the US, and that part is my favorite, I'd say.
Awesome. That's very cool. So do you have any more questions for Carol-Ann?
No more questions from my class, but thank you so much for sharing.
Yes, thank you. That's such a lovely story. I might get that from my nephew or something, because he's very interested in science as well. So I'd like to give a big thank you to Captain Hearn and Carol-Ann Black for joining us for today's Full Steam Ahead session, and for the wonderful students and all of your questions. If you have any further questions for either Carol-Ann or Captain Hearn, you can always contact Ships to Shores and we can reach out to them. But we hope that you enjoyed both presentations today, and we hope that you have a good rest of your day.